There's a lot of toil, particularly that GPs and nurses do, that is just busy work that can be automated. And one of our really experienced GP fellows, he was quite emotional. He was like, man, Josh, this just makes me such a better doctor. In my heart, I would love to do this for every patient, but I don't have the typing skills or the time to be able to do it. But the fact this is done for me automatically as an outcome of an encounter using AI is just incredible. And that's really powerful.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.
Greetings and welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Spain. Joining us today is Josh Robb, co-founder and chief operating officer at Tend Health. Josh has spent more than 2 decades building and scaling technology teams and products with leadership roles across Pushpay, AIA and Tend. Tend is reimagining healthcare for New Zealanders, combining a nationwide network of clinics with 24/7 online care and a technology platform designed to make accessing healthcare simpler, faster, and more connected. Josh, welcome back to the show.
It's great to be here, Paul.
Good to have you here. Lots to delve into today. So looking forward to hearing an update on what's happening in the Tend world. But we've got the usual sort of local and international tech news to delve into too. And of course, a big thank you to our show partners. So thank you, Spark, One New Zealand, 2 Degrees, Workday, Fortinet, PwC, and Gorilla Technology. On the New Zealand front, New Zealand is expanding our use of maritime drones for surveillance as we see allies, including the United States and Australia, increasingly deploying armed sea-based drones in real-world military operations. And that's really sparked, I think, a bit of interest and maybe some concern. Should New Zealand be focused on just monitoring and using, drones from a surveillance perspective across the oceans? Or, should we be adopting drone capabilities that can shall we say, take action, take offensive action? And we spoke earlier on in the year with Cybersecurity Aerospace and heard a little bit about what they were doing. They had huge success in the UK with the British Army, and we now know that the New Zealand Defence Force has moved ahead and has purchased CIOS SM300 ocean-going drones. However, at this stage, more from the surveillance perspective. What are your thoughts on this? Because there's the angle that if we put people out there to take action, then that puts people's lives at risk. However, if we go fully autonomous and you've got AI and automation making decisions, then that's a problem too.
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky, isn't it? I think New Zealand has the largest exclusive economic zone in the world around us to patrol and a very underinvested military to do it. So some assistance seems like a no-brainer. But I mean, I don't think the P3s that are flying around doing the aerial surveillance are armed. So do we need armed drones? I mean, what are we going to do? Attack Chinese fishing fleets that are kind of, it seems, I don't know. It doesn't seem very Kiwi, does it? But at the same time, I think it's just, it's fascinating watching what's happening, what Ukraine are doing with the Black Sea fleet. They've taken out so many tankers in the last couple of weeks. I don't know if you've seen any of this coverage. Incredible, but I mean, they're just absolutely destroying the Russian kind of black, what do they call the shadow fleet, or whatever it is, that are kind of exporting illegal oil. Yep. And I think they've taken out 30 or 40 vessels in like a week, I saw last week or the week before. So it's a pretty important capability to be on top of. And if we're not patrolling our EEZ with armed drones, someone else will be. I don't know, it seems like Yeah,
and this is that whole balancing act of getting the best, the positive, good uses out of technology, and the reality that as a country we have to have a defence capability.
We do.
And when it comes down to being cost effective, leveraging newer, smart
It seems
technologies.
way smarter to invest in that than in new ships, right? New personnel ships, new personnel carrying ships. Yeah,
differential between traditional military investment, whether it's ships, jets, helicopters, is night and day different. So there's a degree there where I'd be leaning in a lot more towards what SIOS and is producing and what can be done on that sort of basis that puts people less in harm's way. I think there is, though, a bigger picture beyond just patrolling our own sea area, because New Zealand Defence Force has routinely served in other parts of the world. If we look back over time, not just exclusively here. So having that capability and being able to use them appropriately in the future, I think is something that we definitely have to keep exploring. And part of that exploring means investing and actually getting that capability on board.
But probably also interoperability with partners.
Yes, I think there's a lot of military clout that we see other countries having that New Zealand is unlikely to have any time soon.
Yeah.
Whether that's nuclear subs or what have you, right? Like
planes, whatever.
Yeah. So on very much an international story, but with implications for New Zealand, we hear that Indian startup Skyroot Aerospace has successfully launched their Vikram 1, which is India's first privately developed orbital rocket. Now, this milestone supports India's ambitions to expand what they're doing in the space sector, particularly from a commercial standpoint, as they work to really be able to compete strongly on a global basis when it comes to satellite launch and other private space sector innovation. So, exciting news for India, but interestingly for us in New Zealand, the Vikram 1 rocket actually, I guess you could call it something of potential competition for what Rocket Lab are doing. 350 kilograms into low Earth orbit is what the Vikram 1 is able to lift, and that compares to around 300 kilograms that the Electron launches routinely from New Zealand on a pretty regular basis. Now, of course, if we step back a little bit, there are a lot of companies that have had a success at being able to get one or two rockets launched, but very, very few who are able to do anything on a regular, cadence, right? So really interesting to see. I see there that India are aiming to grow their space economy from what's listed as $8 billion to $44 billion by 2033. So look, they'd be silly not to. I think any country that has some involvement in the space sector should be smart enough to look at, hey, how can we
get
grow
in on
that?
This? Yeah.
Just as New Zealand is with our roughly 300 aerospace companies and multiple players doing some pretty cutting edge stuff up and down the country. So but when we hear these bits of news, it in some ways there'll be especially Indian Kiwis kind of probably celebrating, think this is really cool. But there's also a lot of Kiwis. I think the last thing I heard was it's at least 60,000 Kiwis with shares in Rocket Lab.
Yeah, wow. I think the private space race is actually kind of one of the coolest things that's happened in my lifetime, really. Like, as a kid, you kind of followed what NASA were doing, and, sending a rocket up was like a real milestone event.
Yes.
And now it's happening daily. And I just don't even think we really yet understand. Like, we need a lot more lift than we've got. So I'm kind of here for competition. It's obvious that there's kind of sovereignty desires around not being dependent on a single supplier or a single country or a single geopolitical bloc. So It's natural. I mean, you would have seen the Chinese landing last week, which is pretty cool.
Japan are at it.
Yeah, Japan are at it. I mean, it's just inevitable, So I think it's great. I think, Russia are really, really hurt by Starlink not making that available to them or turning it off for good reasons. But that kind of like, oh, hang on a minute, this is starting to impact kind of our strategy, our military strategy is kind of a big wake-up call for everyone. Like everyone had to get their own GPS constellations up, 20 or 30 years ago. It's kind of another round of that really, of like, oh, hang on a minute. Yeah. So, and I mean, it'll be interesting to see what happens with the data center satellite space stuff. If that really turns into a massive pathway, which obviously Elon's pretty focused on, then I think that will rapidly change.
There's a kind of big
curve,
if
right?
still in my head as to whether these things will be pulled off
Yeah.
or not, and then if, then what does it actually look like, and how,
what are the economics of it?
how much will we see that evolve in terms of data centers being in space versus not. So
Fascinating times.
lots of interesting times here. Now on that front, of course, SpaceX and their share price has been, fairly constantly getting attention because it was such a big, high-profile initial public offering there, and it attracted a good chunk of investment. We saw the share price rise very quickly. Now it's somewhat sort of come back to earth, as it were. And I read 23,000 New Zealand investors had bought shares through Sharesies, which to me is a little bit of a reflection of the excitement and the hype of new things, new opportunities, and the reality that folks will get involved in something that I would have thought was at the more risky end of an investment, because this is not a new entity. They've been around for a long time, and that it had already attracted a really, really large amount of capital. So it's been quite fascinating to watch. And then I see some coverage kind of looking at the fact that so many other folks have ended up, ultimately with an investment in SpaceX, because they're part of an index fund. And that, I guess, for me has triggered some thoughts around how should we invest in 2026, and how is that maybe different from previous times to invest.
I mean, we're not financial advisors, right? So there's nothing here as fun, just us spitballing. But I was listening to someone on the weekend talking about this, and they were saying you can now get ETFs that are like the top 100 less Elon, or the top 100 less whoever you morally object to. If you're a Palestinian rights person, you can get we're going to take out the cohort of companies that we don't like because they're supporting, Israel or whatever it is. So you can kind of package products now, and I think if you're concerned about that, then there are products in the marketplaces that you can buy that kind of give you broad coverage without having specific investments, if that's what you want. The other side of the coin is, I think this is slightly misunderstood, is that indexes are scaled to the free float. So it's not the market cap and it's not the valuation, and people kind of lose track of that. It's like, I think SpaceX is, like only 3% free float or something at the moment. Everything else is locked up, or maybe it's slightly more than that. But so the actual proportion of SpaceX in your index is not the market cap of SpaceX against the market cap of everything else. It's the proportion of the free float. So it's actually a lot less influential than you might otherwise expect. I think the number 3% is actually how much SpaceX affects the top 100 index. So it's not actually as influential as its market cap might lead you to think. And so the swings in it don't necessarily affect your ETF there to quite the same amount.
Yeah.
But I mean, it is a reasonable question, and I think people are particularly alive to this because of the index rules waiving for the IPO. So it's coming. And so you kind of have to worry about, well, is this going to affect my retirement savings plan, or is this going to affect my, some other scheme that I've got going on?
And look, I think we've got more flexible investment options today than we've ever had before, right? Whether that's for your KiwiSaver and you want to build a custom KiwiSaver that fits your interests, and if you're a tech person, you can lean in onto the tech stocks that you're interested in, get custom things. Get exposure to startups. It's actually, I think an incredible time from that perspective. And because such a high percentage of the New Zealand population now has a Kiwi
Some sort of
saver,
yeah.
then you've got a very high percentage of the New Zealand population that are investing outside of their
Property
home, if
and
they have property,
Yeah.
home investment, and outside of bank account. So yeah, there's some really good stuff about that. I think there are challenges in that the level of knowledge and education probably varies quite broadly.
Yep.
And some of the folks that I chat to, hearing how they talk about what to invest in is I find it a little bit head scratching, but we probably all succumb to a degree to the kind of the hype and the excitement around what this company and that company could or should or might do. And so yeah, it is fascinating, but certainly where I've had friends that are like, oh, Paul, should I buy XYZ stock? And I'm not usually one to recommend stocks at all, even to close friends. I'm usually saying, well, think about these things and recognize that probably
what are the trade-offs?
anything that about, whether it's SpaceX or any other company, that's probably public knowledge that everybody else has. So it's quite possibly built into the price already. So you have to then be trying to weigh up what about the risky future. And yes, if they pull that off, it could
be
however
great,
many times up. If they don't pull that off, then it could go in the other direction. And really that's part of the reality of these things.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. I do think there's probably room for improvements in financial literacy and education is probably the big thing for me, is like, how do we make sure that people are well equipped for this stuff and not too vulnerable to kind of undue kind of persuasive tactics or whatever else. That's probably the key thing I'm concerned about is, yep.
And of course, we're in an AI world, so there's ways in which folks can lean into
Absolutely.
AI to
Educate
do
themselves.
all sorts of things, whether that's the education or building algorithms and so on, to give you something that's maybe custom to you in terms of helping make decisions. So it's definitely a fascinating time. So yeah, on the SpaceX front, I have no idea what their future holds, but it looks to be on a little bit of a downward trajectory at the moment, from opening on the NASDAQ on, what was it, 13th of June, from a New Zealand perspective, to today, and they're at around $120. So yeah, a bit of a drop.
Probably a bit inevitable, to be honest, given how frothy it was at listing, but yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, interesting things ahead on that front. I think one of the things that maybe doesn't get quite enough attention from an investing perspective is, how is the world different in 2026 when it comes to the future of businesses compared to when investing. And I remember when I probably had my sort of earliest dabbles in the share market going back about 20 years ago, and my business partner put me onto his share broker, stockbroker, and I remember calling them up and, I want to invest in this tech company, and they had to go away and find out what the actual current share price was, because they weren't even tracking. And I think it was probably like, I remember, there was like AMD, Microsoft, big well-known companies,
and they weren't even
and they weren't they didn't have like the current price. So they're like, I'll go and get you a quote for that. I mean, this is so prehistoric. But I remember advice around, you should be investing in these blue chip firms. And and some of them, they're still relevant today. But if you it'd be interesting to go back and kind of look at all of the what I was being told were the good ones to invest in, like Air New Zealand and the Warehouse.
That'd be a good little project to give to Claude or something.
So on,
just
right?
Do some analysis. What would have happened if I'd held?
Whereas I think we have a lot more knowledge today on what sectors and markets have got disrupted. But also, there's still a whole lot of unknown. We look at, say, Xero, our biggest, SaaS company,
Business,
right? and their stock is at
All-time,
roughly half of what it was a year or so back, and that all just kind of happened quite quickly.
Yeah.
In fact, a year ago they were tracking at around 180 Australian dollars.
Yeah.
Today they're at 68, and this is very common across a lot of those software
Those
companies.
kind of older SaaS businesses or more established SaaS businesses, right? Yeah.
It's really, really interesting, and I don't know that anyone can could say, if we looked at sort of the top software businesses in the world, could give you a great prediction of where these companies are going to be over 5 or 10 years, even whether they're going to be around, and if they are around, whether they're going to be stronger or weaker than what they are today. Like, there's actually that aspect where there's so much uncertainty of the role of AI and disruption and changing business models.
Well,
This stuff's hard, right?
It really is, especially in the face of this much disruption. And I think there's kind of two independent things that are kind of converging, right? One is that, you've had this crazy, weird sort of long period of very low interest rates where kind of return on capital was nearly impossible. And so there's a lot of SaaS businesses that had quite poor cost discipline, if I'm being honest, both on staff and also on kind of cost to serve, cost of goods sold, whatever you want to think about. And so there's a bunch of SaaS businesses whose cost structure is probably higher than it needs to be for the probable underlying value of the product and the service. And so what do you do about that is a really hard problem. That's real hard not to unpick. And then at the same time, you're seeing this disruption in terms of, well, actually, you can have a small team do a lot more work than you could 3 years ago, a small capable team. So do we even need all these people? What are they doing? It's tricky. And then the other question is, like, what is the future of software and SaaS in general? Like, does all software just become ephemeral eventually? Do you just kind of produce software as you need it and then dispose of it? That's possible. That's one possible scenario, in which case, like, what is the value of a business that sells software? Like, there may still be value there, but it looks quite different. And I think either way, SaaS businesses typically run well over 80% gross margins, and it's inevitable there's margin compression there. Like, what's the Jeff Bezos famous quote? Your margin is my opportunity. And so sooner or later, that comes to every sector. And there's been this kind of golden age of, running 80, 90% gross margins on SaaS. But really, what does a 30% gross margin SaaS business look like? We're about to find out. And I keep on hearing stories from people about this where, like, there's a billing platform that we used at Pushpay called Zuora, which is billing's really complicated, and especially in the States where you've got like 1,300 different tax jurisdictions and stuff, it's very complicated to meet compliance on that. Was public, 4,500 employees. Founder bought it back, took it private, and his stated goal is to get it to one employee.
That's insane.
But it's already down, I think, 2/3.
Wow.
As he just cuts cost out of the business, cuts out overhead. Because, I mean, if you think about SaaS, like, one way to conceptualize SaaS is that customers effectively pay for acquisition of future customers. And my view as a customer is, well, why should I pay for you to get more business? Like, I should just pay you for what I'm using, not for whatever else you're doing. So, I think there's probably a big structural inversion there, but just how that looks and plays out over the next few years is going to be really interesting. I still think SaaS is a super valuable commodity in terms of, I don't want to have to manage software. I'd much rather pay someone to manage security and compliance and upgrades and security and everything else for me. But I want it at a reasonable price.
Yes.
And if I can build it and host it myself for $100 and you want me to pay $10,000, there's a big road for me to hoe to justify myself signing a big check for that. So where is the trade-off in the middle there?
Yeah, it is going to be fascinating to see what are the changes. I saw one recently, and I don't know how long they've had this policy and whether it just kind of aligns with your earlier comments, whether it relates to AI, but a company called Halo who deliver, information technology service management and professional services automation and now CRM. They publicly stated that as they grow their customer base and
Yeah.
they have more users, that their price will track
Will come down.
And so
Yeah,
they've
awesome.
said at this number, we will take 5% off the current price.
that's
At
cool.
this number,
Yeah,
we will
right.
reduce it another 5%. At this number, we'll reduce it another 5%.
Fascinating.
So that to me is setting, quite an interesting standard. The other thing that stood out about their approach in a sector where we often see private equity buy up firms, maybe multiple firms in the same space, is they've said that they won't divest, the existing owners won't divest the business in the next decade,
Right.
and at this stage that's a rolling decade.
From today. Right.
So in a year's time, unless they've given some other announcement, then it's still going to be a decade away.
Right.
Now, there's probably all sorts of things that could be, sneakily done if a business kind of wanted to get out in some ways. I don't know, but that to me was those were two things that I hadn't generally, been
There's definitely some
recognizing as a differentiator, and I think they're really strong.
There's some really interesting models kind of emerging in that space, aren't there? Around kind of like, okay, well, like there's a number of funds that are or entities that are buying up software companies, and like we're holding this forever. Like we're buying and holding it.
Yeah.
Because customers are sick of, we've got a new owner, we're changing strategy, or we're de-investing in this, or we're forcing you off this platform onto that. And there's some sort of like, hey, we're just like some sense of like we're the customer here.
Yeah.
So I think there's some really interesting opportunities alongside some of the challenges, but yeah.
Yeah, and it makes the process of selecting software now, more nuanced. There's more things
Super
to think
nuanced,
about
yeah,
and to research when you're helping an organization, make those sorts of decisions. And that, that's part of the work that that I do. And we had one scenario with a US-based software company. We had a client that was, saying, look, we want to buy this software. Look, just get this done and get it implemented, right? And we were like, well, there's some checks and balances here that are quite important from a cyber perspective and a due diligence perspective. And we managed to convince them just, slow down a little bit, let us do some of that work in the background. And so we fired up our process, and I was sitting on the call to the salesperson in the US. And we got about halfway through the call, and he'd been just touting, that why we definitely should buy this bit of software. And I said, okay, now in this sort of day and age where private equity firms buy up multiple competing products and so on, what's your story?
Yeah,
I didn't know at all at that point. And that was part of the reason for being on the call is to fill in the picture. And he said, I was going to tell you, Paul, yes, we've got this one product that we've stopped development on. The product you're looking at, we'll be finishing up development on that soon. And then we've got this other one. That's our cash cow. That's what all the focus is going to be on, right? And if I hadn't have made that call and we'd just said to the customer, look, if you're convinced, if that's what all your other related firms are saying is the best product to use and so on, okay, well, you've done the research, let's just do it.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it's a huge decision, key part of their whole operation. They would have gone down a really bad track. So
the other thing I'm seeing at the moment
important.
is kind of incumbent legacy products that have that kind of captive market. It sounds like that's the scenario you're talking about a little bit, specialist kind of products in a vertical, who are also completely uninteroperable. And their strategy is to not allow any other players in. So there's no APIs, there's no integration. And I think in this current world where it's becoming very quickly possible to add capabilities to software using agents or using AI or whatever, that actually that kind of openness of the platform becomes a really important decision-making tool, because you can end up painting yourself into a corner really quickly if you don't get the right rights to access platforms or data or whatever as part of that procurement decision.
Yeah, that's really challenging. In fact, we had JD Trask on the show recently, and we were talking about a challenge with Xero. Yes, they've been amazing in terms of having APIs since year dot and really kind of leading the way in building an ecosystem. But now they've changed how they build for that. And if you want to use your Gen AI platform to talk to Xero. Is there an MCP capability? Well, yeah, kind of. They've made something available, sort of open source, you can download. It's not a native, functionality where you can just chat to it from Claude or what have you. And yeah, he was certainly sort of but bemoaning some of the challenges there. But look, I get it. When you look at established businesses
Incumbency,
that,
right?
that ultimately are incumbent, right? They are now the incumbent, not
Being disruptive.
not the disruptor,
Yeah, exactly.
right? And so we've got the disruptors trying to come through. They will be trying to hold on to their place and their profits and so on. But in some ways it reminds me of kind of looking in at Sky TV in New Zealand a few years ago, and occasionally I got quoted in media for throwing stones at them. But look, I could also understand they had a really, really strong revenue base, which to a degree has continued. However, if you don't adjust, then you will get these sort of incumbents will get knocked out of the market. And look, Sky have kind of somewhat reinvented themselves, and they're still around and still relevant.
Yep.
Maybe their valuations not
quite what it once was.
not what it once was. It is important to sort of step back and to look at these other perspectives as well. Yes, there's always going to be a customer perspective, and as a customer, you can always choose to
change,
do something different. But there's a responsibility to the shareholders as well that there is thought that goes into things, not just, hey, we're moving with this trend because everyone else is doing it. And so I know these things aren't easy. I know we have a lot of people in New Zealand who part of Xero, and we want all of them to keep their jobs and Xero to employ more people, right? How that plays out, time will tell.
Some hard problems.
Yeah. A couple of other bits in the news. AWS had a bit of an issue when it came to their engine that tracks what your spend is. And we saw folks getting crazy bills. I think in one case somebody got a bill or an estimated invoice total for the month coming in at $1.5 trillion.
I saw a billing consultant say they'd seen one customer with 23 quadrillion.
Oh no, that's crazy. So absolute mayhem. It did leave me curious, and I don't know what you read on the topic, but as to someone sort of vibe coded something in there to do with their estimation engine without having that thoroughly checked, or is that a completely human mistake? But
I mean, Amazon's an amazing, or AWS is an incredible organization, and there's two services that AWS run that just absolutely blow my mind, and one is the Amazon billing service,
yes,
and the other one is the Amazon identity and access management service. Those two services at the bottom of the dependency tree. Every other service they've ever built depends on those two things, and they have to be 100% accurate and 100% available all the time. And so it's just fascinating to me that they even scale when you consider like they're metering milliseconds of Lambda usage and everything else.
Yeah.
But I mean, this is obviously pretty public. Who knows? The quality has been a bit more variable recently than it had historically been, and they've seen a lot of kind of senior departures over the last kind of 3 or 4 years. So it's concerning.
Now, two other topics I wanted to tap on quickly before we sort of delve in for an update on 10. One was the crazy situation that we've kind of landed in when it comes to to zero-day vulnerabilities or cybersecurity issues that are happening and being taken advantage of in the real world before fixes are available publicly. So Microsoft have been caught in that world, and so has WordPress. Microsoft has this month addressed more vulnerabilities in a single month than they ever have done in history before. Something like 600 vulnerabilities addressed in the last month. This compares with normally they're patching maybe 50 to 100 vulnerabilities, so 5 to 10 times what is your typical month. And So that creates a pressure for organisations to get those patches out, get them deployed very, very, very quickly when some of these things are actually actively being exploited in the wild. And then there was WordPress Saturday New Zealand time. Yeah, we had our team rapidly getting patches out for organisations that we work with that were running WordPress, because there was a pretty shocking vulnerability there. You could go to, I think, the simple breakdown. You could go to the login screen, inject certain content into the login that would basically allow you to take over and take complete control of a website and the web server. Interestingly, WordPress, this is an open source platform. They initiated a forced patching of customer web servers, which is virtually unprecedented. It is very, very unusual to see this type of action where somebody who you don't have any sort of commercial partnership with or what have you. They're not
hosting your stuff.
And the I guess the foundation behind WordPress, I haven't looked up the legal bits and pieces there, but they made the decision that with 500 million installs of WordPress running around the world, if they didn't actually trigger those updates, then there might be even worse news. But I've seen very little coverage of the fact that they actually took control of people's web servers and, yes, quite likely knocked off some, broke some things and so on, but much less damage than there would have been otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, I think it seems like the brand damage would be... it's funny, I actually had missed that aspect of it, which is interesting. And it's interesting they've even got the capability to do that.
I didn't know they had the capability.
Oh, wait, hang on a minute, yeah. I can imagine how it might work. Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, I think it's actually probably sensible if the alternative is 100 million compromised WordPress installs. Like, that's a bad day for a lot of people. But
depends on their governance.
Because
you could imagine if a bad actor had taken control of that,
shut it down,
and did decided to take control of 500 million websites, then we would have had some different news headlines.
What's the vulnerability in that one, right?
So, fascinating times. I think key reminder there is, as a country, we've just got to keep stepping up from a cyber perspective. Anyone that's involved in ensuring their organisations are patched and kept up to date, our job from that perspective is even harder, today than it was yesterday, because we need to keep these things moving really fast in an AI world where...
Although there are benefits to that too, right? And I think it's a double-edged sword, that one, because on the one side, I mean, part of this is being caused by AI. What's Linus's thing, in the face of a million eyes, all bugs are shallow. And so if you can use AI to discover vulnerabilities, and you really rapidly increase the rate at which you find them. And so the question is, are the defenders or the offenders
winning,
harnessing that first? And at the moment, the state-of-the-art models have these guardrails, which mean that you can't use them for cyber defense. So, but, just over the weekend, Kimi 3 came out, K3, and that model is probably it's somewhere, but it's very close to, if not at the state-of-the-art, between Opus 4.8 and Fable. And there are no guardrails, and it's open weight, so you can run it anywhere you've got inference compute.
Yes.
So all of a sudden, people now, like both offenders and defenders, have a capability that they can use to scan and improve stuff. I spent an hour talking about this with my team this morning. We've just done a pen test on a new series of products that we've built. Got back a completely clean pen test from the pen testers, and pen testers hate having zero findings. Like, there's a really crappy
feel like
day
a
for them.
failure.
Yeah, they really hate it. They hate it. But the team used AI to do all of the prep for this. So while they were developing this new set of products, they were scanning, the AI was scanning them, giving them feedback, making recommendations, fixing some of the stuff themselves. So they had quite a high degree of confidence going in that we were in a good place. And the pen testers is kind of verifying that, which is the defenders also have these capabilities, which I think is a really encouraging thing. So I think it's going to be a real rocky year, but I'm actually quite optimistic about the overall improvement in software AppSec as this evolves. What's going to be hard is the organizational, institutional responses to these, because that moves much slower than the technology.
Yeah.
And particularly if you're like hey, we patch once a month kind of an org.
Those days are over.
Those days are well and truly over.
You have to be able to move move fast and get things out, and we will probably see more of the sort of out of cycle patches coming through, and we just have to learn to roll with that. And look, there's some risk because there's not enough time to actually test everything, that you kind of have to roll it out.
And there are some really interesting products emerging around this as well. Like there's a New Zealand startup called RedShield. Have you seen them? And they have a WAF that sits between your applications and the internet, and effectively adaptively responds to incoming threats and blocks them. So if you can't patch the underlying system quickly enough, you can patch it at the WAF level, which is, that's instant. So that's I think there's a lot of really interesting adaptive, and I know they're doing some stuff with AI at the moment around kind of real-time response stuff. Yep. So I think there'll be a whole nother set of capabilities that defenders get that will be quite powerful as well. But it is a very uncertain time.
Yeah.
And there's a need, I think you said this, but there's a real need for governments and institutions to make sure they've got good programs here. And particularly in New Zealand, certainly what I see is a lot of underinvestment in this space.
Oh yeah, this is what we were chatting about before the podcast
started. Exactly.
Yeah, there is that difference that probably New Zealanders had compared to, say the NCSE and the government, guidance in the UK for differing types of organisations and how they should be protected. And the more that as a country we can take some learnings.
And just front. Kind of, I think there's going to have to be, you have obligations around, health and safety, and you have obligations around, other things. Like you should have obligations around your cyber hygiene or your cybersecurity to some degree, without maybe too much regulation, but there needs to be some sticks otherwise.
Well, I think it's getting easier too. Now, just one more topic quickly. Japan has decided to make what is being referred to as a bold national step on AI. Partnering with the likes of NVIDIA to build a sovereign AI infrastructure capability focused on physical AI. Technologies to power robotics, industrial automation, digital twins. Yes, they'll be able to do, I guess more standard Gen AI type things as well. And they're saying this project will provide a computing foundation for the Japanese government backed Frontier initiative, bringing together manufacturing expertise, industrial data, and advanced AI infrastructure to accelerate innovation across a range of sectors where Japan has a level of strength, and I think that they see this as an opportunity to, I guess, future-proof themselves a little bit by making that investment now. So they're talking about an AI factory with 140 megawatts of dedicated AI data center capacity, and was it 27,500 NVIDIA Rubin GPUs? There's a whole lot of money there being spent into the their own capabilities. This is really interesting because I guess most countries have been just look, we'll leverage what the US is doing. Yeah, and it's kind of been US and China where most of the investment's gone. There has been a chunk of talk around what could and should sort of sovereign AI investment look like, and here's one approach.
It's interesting because obviously Japan has this big demographic cliff, right? So they've got a massive workforce shortage baked into their demographics, and so they've been big in robotics for a while because they've been looking at how are we going to care for old people if we don't have enough young people to staff facilities or hospitals or aged care facilities, whatever it is. So it makes total sense to me that they're focusing on that kind of robotic approach. They've already got deep chops there, and they know they have to solve a real economic problem for themselves in terms of how they maintain their manufacturing base and their service sector. So that makes real logic. That seems like a very logical strategy to me, as opposed to, we're just going to put up a data center and hope that it turns into some economic outcome. We think we can make better capital allocation decisions than Silicon Valley seems like a poor bet for a state without some grander strategy like that. So
and it'll be interesting to see how others look at this, and what approaches other countries with deep pockets decide to do. Now on to Tend. Keen to hear where things are at.
Yeah.
It's been a while
It's
since
been a while.
we've
Yeah.
had you on the show. Lots of things going on. Now, understand that Green Cross Medical is you're close to sort of finalising that acquisition. But maybe for those who aren't familiar, what is Tend?
Yeah.
What's your your capability and your spread around the country and so on.
Yeah, great. So we're a primary care provider or a healthcare service provider. So we have about 500 staff, mostly doctors and nurses and healthcare assistants and receptionists and that kind of stuff. So very much a services business, but really digitally enabled. And it's been built out as a platform. So all of our team are on a single instance of everything. We can move work around. We can move phone calls around. There's a single instance of people's patient files. This sounds really normal to people that are used to the knowledge economy and knowledge work. But within healthcare, everything is siloed. Everything is siloed, and it's been really, really hard to kind of work through breaking down the walls. But the idea is that we want to make it really, really easy to get access to the kind of care you need when you need it for a consumer or a patient. And we want to try and make the job of providing healthcare services for our workforce easier as well, because that's really hard. And when you look at, you would see this if you go and visit your doctor, but you look at the systems they're using and you look at what they're having to do, and there's a lot of clicking and a lot of typing and a lot of things that look like they haven't been touched in 20 years from a technology perspective.
And you wonder how secure they
And
are,
precisely,
as well as how
right,
productive
exactly.
they are, right?
So we've built a platform for the business that's a set of products with partners that we have really great relationships with, some technology that we've built ourselves, and we're working really hard as fast as we can to integrate that so it's easy to use for the workforce and the information's joined up. And there's always been a strategy since we started Tend to use AI. What's really cool is the capabilities have come online with really good timing. But we actually did a Callaghan growth grant, or project grant, in 2021 that was all about okay, the first thing, before we can do anything clever, we have to instrument the patient interactions and the provider interactions, just start actually understanding what's happening so that we can then work out, okay, how do we start moving work around? Where can we automate? What are the opportunities? So we've spent the last kind of 5 or 6 years doing that. And the way that we've done that is by buying medical centres and then doing quite intensive kind of transformation on them. So full change management in terms of people's role. Well, the job of a doctor or a nurse is the same as it always is, really, but really changing some workflows, changing the operating model quite dramatically, changing models of care, introducing new technology, joining it up. And that's really difficult because often these people have been working there for decades in some cases, and no one loves change. Even the people that say they like change don't really like it when it happens to them.
Sure.
But buying medical centre, so we've got 25 medical centres at the moment currently. And we've acquired some of those as small networks in groups, and some of them we've acquired one at a time. We've integrated 15 of them into the Tend network so far, so they're all joined up. And then we also offer these online services, like we have a telehealth service. We've got a service that lets you order medical certificates if you need one, and a bunch of other stuff.
Have a sickie.
Yeah, it's not so much making it easy. It's more,
I'm just having a joke.
I've never been asked for a medical certificate in my career.
Yeah.
But if you work
Likewise.
in a factory,
Yeah.
you're almost certainly going to be asked by your employer for a medical certificate. And so it's really unequal how that works. I remember talking to the chair of an iwi, Ngāti Maniapoto, and she was telling me that their iwi members, if they get sick, they'll work at a factory. Their only option is to go and stand outside the medical centre at 7 o'clock in the morning while they're sick so they can get a medical certificate so they don't have to go to work. And it's really inequitable and unnecessary. And the other thing is that doctors are not, it's a really bad misallocation of a doctor's time to do a medical certificate. That's all you need. It turns out nurses can sign medical certificates from a legal perspective. So we use nurses to do that. And that works really, really well. There's really good scaffolding. If they're concerned about your well-being, they can refer you straight into a doctor, which is really cool, telehealth. But it just makes things move more easily. We can do that at a much cheaper price. We can do it more conveniently, et cetera, et cetera. So at the moment, you can see a doctor on our platform via telehealth, normally within 2 or 3 hours. And we work really hard to get in-person appointment availability down. It's complicated because humans are humans and people get sick and whatever else. But normally you can get an in-person appointment in a couple of days across our network, which is really cool. But growing the network by buying medical centres is slow and painful, and those transactions they eat a lot of time and capability. So we've entered into an agreement with Green Cross to buy the doctors network. The Green Cross shareholders approved that last week, and we've done that with support of a whole bunch of iwi investors, which is really exciting. So We've had really great support from iwi over the last few years, but we've got a whole bunch of them as capital partners for this transaction, joining our shareholder register, which is really exciting.
That is, and it's a little bit extra exciting for me because I'm on their patient.
You're a doctor's patient.
on their patient register.
Yeah.
And look, yeah, quite interesting from the technology perspective. It's always felt like they were backwards, and even I remember having a discussion with one of their GPs about something technology wise that wasn't a good indicator, and it was like, wow, we're now part of this group, and we're owned by Green Cross, and that means XYZ in terms of getting change. So yeah, it will be interesting to see how these things all kind of move and progress over the time. And getting repeat prescriptions. I remember that being a bit of a challenge, even though they had Manage My Health, etc. I think they moved on from that, but they didn't remove me off Manage My Health, which I had some struggle to get any sort of accountability from the local outfit on, well, you put me here, don't you take me off, and sort of an unwillingness to respond. But on the flip side, they seem to have this thing where you can turn up on a weekend and usually always get an appointment.
Yeah, nice.
So just kind of a walk-in type
clinic,
scenario. So don't flush that down.
Don't
flush that down the toilet.
That's great. That's actually
You'll
really
have
good
one
service.
unhappy customer.
That's great.
But anyway, no, that's really good. Now I've noticed an increasing number of Tend related clinics around.
We've been working hard.
Not just Auckland. So that must be quite a big job to take an existing, clinic that gets acquired or group of clinics, and then need to, kind of pull them into your model in terms of data, or in terms of all those changes that you were talking about in terms of how the operations actually work. How hard is that to do?
It's really hard. I mean, it requires serious intestinal fortitude, to be honest. People don't like change. We've got a really, really good, very well-structured process for this. It's kind of probably a 14-week program that we take practices through, and we run workshops with them. We're like, hey, here's how your cheese is moving. This is how your model of care is changing. Here's the new technology we're introducing. This is what it means. This is how we're going to train you on it. And we've got better and better at that as we did it. So in 2020, when we first launched, we opened a medical centre in Kingsland that we built from the ground up. And then we acquired Simon Street Medical Centre the next year, end of the next year, and kind of did that as well. That was a bit of a turnaround job that was going out of business, and so it needed some help. But then we started buying big medical centres and big groups, and so we did Pakuranga in 23, and then we did 4 medical centres in Tauranga at the beginning of 24, and then we did a whole bunch in Canterbury, 24, 25, to get up to 15. But it is hand to hand. We put a team on the ground for kind of 3 to 4 weeks around that actual major transition, and they'll be back there. Beforehand, I'll be there, probably for a week at a time for kind of 3 or 4 weeks in the lead up to that. So it was very, very hands-on. Mm-hmm. We have a really good continuous learning culture, so we're really good at kind of reflecting, going, okay, what do we learn? What do we do differently? How our partners perform? Do we need to change any processes? Whatever else. But it's difficult. And I think we've got better and better at making the surface area of the change smaller for various groups. So doctors these days, for the most part, are pretty... it's probably the smallest surface area of change for them. They change the system that they're using, but broadly we've done a really good job of making that very, very simple for them. We introduce some new things, but those new things are generally we introduce our in-house AI scribe, which actually makes their life easier. So there's some treats for them along the way. For nursing, the change is a bit more, but again, I think we always use subject matter experts. So the people that we bring in to help do the change are doctors that are working in centres that have been through this process. The nurses that we bring in are nurses that have been through this process and centres that have been through it. So it's kind of like, hey, I've had this happen to me. This is my experience. This is what's going to happen to you. The first 3 weeks are going to suck. You're going to hate it. Sometimes people cry. Occasionally people, get very frustrated, and so we get good at de-escalating people and whatever else. Sometimes I think, man, I used to write software for a living. That was way easier,
Dealing with computers versus people.
Yeah, but I think it's been really powerful, and as I said, it gives us these really powerful capabilities in terms of moving work around, taking toil. There's a lot of toil, particularly that GPs and nurses do, that is just busy work that can be automated. So we have some RPA that we run that does a lot of our administration that's just filling in forms.
This is robotic process
Yeah,
automation
sorry, robotic
tool.
process automation. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just literally filling in the forms that you have to fill in. So,
Right.
so that like takes that entire job. There's normally someone's job in a medical centre whose job it is to kind of file the paperwork with ACC for claims, and that's like a whole job. And they normally come in the morning, there's a big stack of paper from yesterday, and they kind of work their way through and make sure they're all coded correctly and they've been submitted. It turns into a button.
Fantastic.
You know, so there are upsides. The challenge probably is that the health information systems have been really sorely neglected over the last 20 years. New Zealand used to lead the world in some of this stuff. We were the first country anywhere that had like a national health index, a unique identifier for health. We have some other cool capabilities, like our e-prescribing system is pretty good. But overall, the governance and the curation and the roadmap around that has not been well managed by the health system custodians. And we're in a bit of a difficult situation now in terms of how fragmented it is. So it's not straightforward to just kind of wave technology at it, because a lot of these things don't have APIs. A lot of them are like running horrendously ancient technologies, and there's a lot of investment required. But we're making really, really good progress on it. And I think there's clearly a path to a system that is much easier for the workforce.
Yes.
And if you can't make it easy for people to do the job, then you can't deliver the services and the care that you need to the community. So it's really about that virtuous cycle. We have I think 80-something% of all of our eligible patient interactions use our AI scribe. So that's something you can send into as a patient, and then the doctor will use it, and it will produce clinical notes. It produces a really nice patient instruction for you, written in the doctor's voice at a kind of 14-year-old reading age, no jargon. It says, hey, Paul, this is what happened today. This is what we're doing. Here's the plan. Here's any safety netting or red flags you need to look out for. This is what you need to do next. No doctor in the world has time to write that. And one of our really experienced GP fellows said to me the other week, he was quite emotional. He was like, man, Josh, this just makes me such a better doctor. Like, in my heart, I would love to do this for every patient, but I don't have the typing skills or the time to be able to do it. But the fact this is done for me automatically as an outcome of an encounter using AI is just incredible. And that's really powerful. And the other thing that gives us is it gives us this, every time you see us, the quality of your clinical record improves. Which is not something that normally happens in primary care, because normally it's a busy doctor, I write a few lines and kind of cryptic hieroglyphics, and it's really just to remind me what we talked about. It's not useful to you as a patient at all. It's not useful to nursing or anyone else that needs to interact with you. And so if you then call up and say, hey, it's Paul, I'm just following up, like I got given this medication and da-da-da, you'll probably talk to a nurse because the doctor will be busy. And then the nurse has to go and knock on a busy doctor's door, interrupt them, maybe get their head bitten off if they're having a difficult day, and then be like, hey, Paul needs to know. Whereas now, they've got this really great clinical summary of the encounter. They can see the medical reasoning, and they can be like, oh yeah, Paul, like I can see what happened. Yeah, cool, like do this or don't do that, or okay, actually probably need to come back in again, but they can make a really safe decision. And so the feedback from our nursing teams is, hey, this has really helped us provide better quality care to our patients as part of a true multidisciplinary team, as opposed to the GP being the kind of singular locus of primary care.
Mm-hmm. Two things come to mind for me. One is, it's been talked about for a long time, but having a healthcare system that is actually proactive.
Yeah.
Do you see the way that things are coming together with the way that Tend operates, that actually you've then really laid the foundations for a completely proactive healthcare, type capability, because you've actually got data in a kind of useful way. There's other bits and pieces I'm sure that have to kind of be added in to be truly proactive. But it sounds to me like it's kind of some of the foundations.
Yeah, I mean,
that
I
would
think
allow that
I think
future.
we're on the right track, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, I think that what's the old adage? Garbage in, garbage out. The quality of data in healthcare in general is pretty poor for a whole variety of reasons. Like if you trained as a nurse or a doctor, like you haven't trained to be a data entry clerk, right? And it's not the highest priority for you to make sure that I've coded all of these things about this encounter correctly.
Yeah.
And so, but AI is really good at pulling structured information out of unstructured information and making categorization decisions. So we've got a bunch of agents that are working to kind of like go, okay, like let's just look at the transcript of this encounter that Paul's had with the doctor, and let's just look at his problem list and the long-term conditions he's been diagnosed with and go, which ones are relevant to today's encounter? And that's really helpful for us because it lets us do what's called case mix. So like, why are people visiting? And once you can do that, then you can say, actually what we should do is we should start a diabetes clinic or a weight loss clinic, or actually we need to get some more mental health resources into this location, because actually a lot of what people are seeing GPs about is mental health. GPs can't do much for mental health in 15 minutes, but if we put some health improvement practitioners in there, counsellors, they could be spending 30 minutes with Paul, helping him with his anxiety issues or his relationship problems or whatever it is. And that's a much better use of everyone's time. It's a
You weren't supposed
specialist
to mention those publicly on here, Josh.
But it's kind of that kind of thing. So it's like, how do we get you as a health consumer in front of the right person for your needs today?
Yeah.
Is a really hard problem. And in a really well-run medical centre, the receptionists, the unsung heroes of this, they help you navigate. They're like, oh, look, Dr. Bob isn't available today, but we can get you in with this person and they'll help you. Or actually, look, don't worry, it's going to be okay. I'll put you through to a nurse, and the nurse can do some reassurance and say, actually, if you just sleep on this, it's probably going to be okay and we'll see you tomorrow. Or, hey, bring your sick kid in and we'll squeeze you in, or there's a weekend walk-in clinic or whatever.
Yep.
But how do people navigate? And so getting the data right and getting the data capture right is really, really critical to that. So I think we see heaps of opportunity there, but it starts with getting that foundational data right. We need to know about you. We need to know what you've got, what you need. I mean, simple things that we do, like when doctors are prescribing for you, or any prescriber is prescribing for you, they're prescribing you certain drugs at certain quantities and a certain dosing amount. And so like we know, like if we've prescribed you 2 pills a day for 30 days, we know if you're taking it, if you've got perfect adherence, if you're taking it twice a day, we know how many days supply you've got. You should never run out. So we send you a push notification about 5 days before you should be running out and say, hey, Paul, are you running low? Do you need to get a repeat prescription? Click here and order more. Like just basic stuff, but you have to have all the underlying data quality right to be able to do that in the first place. And that's been a really hard lift, but we've broken the back of a whole bunch of those things. So yeah.
Yeah, there's so much more we can kind of go on this topic. So we'll have to save some of that for next time. In New Zealand, especially after what happened with Manage My Health, there's naturally going to be an interest in how do you ensure that data is kept secure, how what somebody expects to be private is kept private. How are you kind of tackling that on a day-to-day basis? And I like what you said earlier around the new code that you were building with AI, and that you're able to build in some really useful checks and balances sort of through the software development process that's meant when testing afterwards actually it's come up very, very strong. But how do you look at that? Because it's a big picture, right?
Totally.
There's a lot to it.
I mean, so my last business was PushPay, and like that's payments, highly regulated. The PCI DSS is this big behemoth of a compliance program. And so I was really shocked when I got into health, and there was almost nothing on the technology side. Like really, there is almost nothing in terms of compliance obligations around health technology in New Zealand. In other jurisdictions, you have regulation around software as a medical device, and in the US, they have the GDPR covers some stuff in Europe around this as well. New Zealand has the Privacy Act, but that's a very general piece of legislation, and there's nothing else. And I think Manage My Health and then the other breaches that have happened this year have kind of forced a really big systemic response. So there is actually, as of July, there's a new contract in place for primary care. The details are just being finalised, that will roll out over the next year, that will require health service providers to meet the NCSC kind of minimum requirements, which I think is a really, really, really good thing. We already do all of that. Like we run an internal program that looks very much like you'd see in a software business or whatever else. But to require individual medical centres to make sure that they've got the right controls in place or the right agreements with their suppliers for backups and password policies and multi-factor authentication, all that kind of stuff is really important. And I mean, historically, there is a tension in healthcare between security and service delivery. It's not desirable for someone to die because someone's having to enter an MFA code in an emergency department. So you do kind of have to make some trade-offs there. But I think the bar had been way too low for too long. Earlier this year, we rolled out mandatory MFA for all of our staff everywhere. So up until, I forget when this was, May, you needed to use MFA if you were off-site, but if you're in one of our locations, you weren't challenged for MFA, which was a kind of pragmatic decision. But we looked at that and we were like, look, we're not comfortable with this. And so we worked with our suppliers and our vendor, and so we rolled out a model where you'll still get an MFA challenge once a day, even when you're in one of our locations. And because we just think like actually protecting people's health information is part of our duty of care. It's not it's not separate to making sure that we don't hurt you, or that we provide you the medication you need, or access to services or whatever else. It's part of the same thing. So Health New Zealand and the ministry are doing a lot of work on this at the moment, and it's really encouraging to see them taking kind of bold steps forward. It's going to be a big, big lift for the sector, and there's a real lack of capability within the sector around some of this stuff. Health doesn't attract great technologists, frankly, and the people that work there because they're really interested in health, which is awesome, but they're not cybersecurity specialists most of the time. I mean, there are some great people out there, but they're few and far between, and so there is a real need to be able to bring some capability into the sector. So, yeah.
And then lastly, you've touched a little bit on some of the AI usage that you've been, the ways you've been leveraging AI within Tend. Can you maybe just kind of, walk us through that? Because, this stuff is moving so fast.
Yeah.
So a conversation that we had, 3 months ago is like a 3-decade-old, conversation. So we have to kind of keep tapping in on what folks are doing.
So I think there's kind of a few big areas where we're really leaning in. So one is health information is lots of unstructured data fundamentally. I write notes about, if I'm a doctor, I'm writing notes about your visit. I'm saying, this is what we talked about and this is what we did. And then there'll be some structured data around what I prescribed. But that unstructured data is actually really rich source of signal if you can use it. So we're doing two things. One is we're using AI to help draft those notes for doctors. So we're transcribing conversations and then drafting notes and patient instructions and other things. But we're also using it for other sources. So like one example is medical centres get a huge amount of phone calls. And so we want to understand how well are we serving our customers on the phone? You get a lot of complaints about phone calls. We had to wait too long, I didn't get what I need, whatever else. So we're taking a sample of our phone calls, which are recorded in our phone system, running them through a model, and we're scoring them on a whole bunch of domains like, what was the sentiment at the start of the call, and then what was the sentiment at the end of the call? What was the call about? What do we think the call was about? Did we identify the patient safely? We require our staff to do 3 points of identity verification to make sure you are who you say you are. So it's normally name, date of birth and address or phone number or something like that. Are they following that protocol? Are they following our brand guidelines about how we want them to introduce themselves and describe the service that you're called up about? So, and then we're aggregating all of that information so we can use it for coaching and QA. It's funny because 10 years ago at Pushpay, we had a team of people with headphones that would listen to call recordings and then write scoring into Salesforce kind of scorecards for sales managers to kind of go and give feedback to their teams. But now it's just costs 3 cents to do 1,000 of them sort of situation, which is incredible. And then the other thing that we're doing, which is really cool, is we get a lot of feedback from patients. We ask for feedback after appointments and people will write comments. We get Google reviews. The Health Quality Safety Commission do a quarterly survey of people that have visited the GP and ask them for feedback. I'm probably forgetting some sources. There's lots of different sources of kind of unstructured, kind of verbatim data. What we're doing is we're feeding all of that through models and using it to summarize what we call the voice of the customer. So we do a quarterly report that says, hey, this is what we're hearing. And some of that's about service issues. Some of that's people being happy about things. Some of that's missing gaps in our product. Hey, look, we want this feature. We want a web-based version of the Tend app, which is the thing we've been working on for the last 3 or 4 months. Or, hey, I really want to be able to book a mental health appointment online and we can't do that at the moment. Or, hey, I'm frustrated that I have vision issues and the app's not available in dark mode. So we're using that to kind of summarize out what we're hearing from our customer and use that with our executive team and our operational teams to think about how we're planning services, what we're focusing on from a strategy perspective, and just really being intentional about how we respond to feedback from our users. So that's been super powerful.
That's great.
Couple of quarters in.
Now, you mentioned your sort of scribe, transcription AI kind of capability with your clinicians, your GPs. There was a window of time where no one was kind of officially doing that type of thing in New Zealand.
Yep.
The technology obviously has continued to move at quite a pace. There's quite specific products in the market, but generally they're largely using off the shelf technologies with I guess some customization to make that work. What are you seeing in terms of how good the AI transcription capabilities are that you can draw on from AWS or varying vendors, and how much extra that you have to kind of add to that to make it suit in those environments?
That's a great question. So we started working on this in 23. So there were a couple of products in the market, but only a few, and we didn't like the data posture of any of those products. All of them were capturing that data and using it for training. And we felt from a duty of care perspective that was really unethical, frankly, and also probably illegal under the Privacy Act. So we decided to build our own. And so we're using Bedrock and Anthropic's models for inference, and we're using AWS Transcribe for transcription at the moment. And so those off-the-shelf things work really well. And it's not just transcription. So we transcribe a consult with consent, but then we summarize that into a medical note. And that's the real secret sauce. So actually our Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Graham Denyer, is the main prompt engineer on this. And because he's got a clinical brain, he actually has a computer science background as well, which is super helpful for us, or information systems background. So he's been really invaluable in terms of helping really get the output clinically where we need it to be. But we also capture a ton of metadata off that allows us to measure the quality, because we feel like there's a big difference between an individual doctor deciding to use a product in their consult room and us providing this to hundreds of staff all at the same time. And so we feel like we've got a duty of care to be able to measure the quality and the impact of that. So we collect a whole bunch of metadata off this to go, how is this performing? Is this performing differently for people from Asia than it is from Māori or Pacifica compared to Pākehā? You know, how is it going for people with different deprivations or in different parts of the country, even different practices? You can have a noisy AC in a consult room that's messing up consult transcript quality or not producing as high quality notes. So we're really interested in making sure that we're not just putting technology in there, but we've got good governance and systems and quality control around that, and that we can make improvements to it over time. So that's kind of one dimension of it. But the other thing that we found quite early is that a transcript by itself isn't enough to produce a high quality medical record. And in fact, what we started seeing when we first started kind of testing this in production was quite a lot of hallucination. You know, the model would spit out, oh, you know, this patient is a male who's 45. And it's like, they absolutely are not. Like,
wow.
And so in response to that, we started grounding the context for the models in your medical record. Because we built it ourselves, we can integrate it into our electronic health record. And so the agents have access to, with very good, let me be clear, very good security controls. They have access to some demographic information about you. They know your name, your gender, your age, your ethnicity, but they also know your medication list. They know your long-term conditions, and they can look at recent encounters. And that becomes really important, because if you're seeing a doctor about something transactional, it's kind of, the story's got a beginning, a middle, of an end in a single consult. But often when you're working on a long-term condition or a condition which requires some investigation, follow-up visits don't have the whole story in them. Like, the transcript by itself is not sufficient to understand what's happened, because there's shared context between me as the doctor and you as the patient that isn't ever articulated, because we talked about it last time or the time before.
Gotcha.
And so giving the agents, being able to ground them in the history of your medical record, means that the quality of the notes they produce is phenomenally better than it would be just from a transcript. So that's kind of been very, very powerful for us, and is allowing us to do some really high quality stuff. And certainly our staff that use other products and other environments, because lots of people work part-time in different places, report that what they see from us is much, much higher quality output. Our team can be really responsive to their needs. So, you know, maybe 6 weeks ago, one of our GPs was saying, hey, look, this isn't working very well for procedural medicine. She does a lot of women's health, so she's helping put in long-acting reversible contraception, and that's procedure. And so you're not doing a consult with a patient, you're trying to document what happened after the fact. And so the team went away, had a bit of a think about it, shipped a feature that lets her kind of record procedural type stuff really, really easily by kind of dictating to the machine what's happening and then having that turned into a consistent medical note. So that's really cool. We're also using it for our nursing, for a bunch of things. We're actually using it for that medical certificate service. And that's cool, because that gives them really nice safety netting in terms of documenting the phone call they're having with you, making sure they've checked their red flags. It lets us do QA on that. We're using it with our mental health workforce, and also producing some structured information out of mental health consults. Like, one of the really difficult things with mental health is, how do you measure how effective a mental health intervention was? Outcome measurement is hard. And the best indicator for that is actually the client's reported confidence in the plan you've developed together.
Yes.
So like it's quite common for a psychologist or a counsellor to say, okay, we've talked about this thing, anxiety, whatever it is. We've given some strategies and some techniques. What is your confidence in the plan from 1 to 10? And you might say 7 or 2 or whatever it is. That's probably the best outcome indicator that we know how to capture. And we can extract that from the structured data that we produce without having to have someone go and fill in a form.
Fantastic.
Which is really
That's
cool.
Super helpful.
So we're kind of using this unstructured conversational stuff to start producing structured measurements and indicators, which is super powerful and lets us kind of just look at the quality of the services we're providing, work out where we need to make interventions, and think about how we redesign things for our patients and for our staff.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Josh. Lots packed in there. We've probably burned up a little bit too much of your time. So
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for being so flexible. Yeah, look forward to keeping in touch and chatting again in the not too distant future around how things continue progressing.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been great.
Good stuff. Well, thanks everyone for listening in. And of course, a big thank you to our show partners, PwC, Fortinet, Workday, One New Zealand, 2 Degrees Spark, and Gorilla Technology. That's us for this week. We'll catch you again on another episode next week. See ya.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.